Love between humans is just not easy. And without great examples or education about emotions, communication, sex, and what keeps love alive, it's too easy to be disheartened, settle, or give up on what you want most. I believe you can have the love and intimacy you want. And having coached thousands of people on their love lives for over 20 years, I know what love can be for you. So I'm bringing you people who share vulnerably about their dating and relationship struggles and how they learn to create the most connected, fulfilling, and exciting love and sex of their lives, so you can have it too. If you haven't yet taken the quiz to see what keeps you from having the best love and sex of your life, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. You'll get a personalized report of your strengths and challenges in the 5 crucial areas that lead to your most fulfilling and exciting love and sex life. Go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz to find out. Welcome to this episode of Practicing Love. I'm your host, Shana James, and today's episode is an important one. It's about what men don't realize when a woman's sex drive fades. And this is through a heterosexual lens, as I tend to speak to, because this is the experience I've had. And I want to talk about how it can be such a painful experience that men come to me with, and for their partners as well. And from coaching people for decades, I can say that many couples do hit a point where there is some kind of distance or chasm or misunderstanding, and yet often not speaking up about what's really going on. So when men come to me and say, Shana, my wife doesn't want to have sex anymore, I feel the pain. I feel the confusion, the defeat, the embarrassment, and often it's a pain that a man carries alone for years. And sometimes there is anger in there, frustration in there, but the heart of it, underneath these emotions, and women often don't know this. I think when a woman hears that a man wants sex, women aren't used to thinking, oh, sex is a way that a man has been taught that it's okay to ask for touch and to be vulnerable and to open his heart, actually. And so when women hear what's happening with our sex life, they focus on the sex part. And what I see that men are really asking is, do you still want me? Am I still attractive? Is our relationship dying? Did I do something wrong? There is so much going on under the surface of that question. What I've come to see is that men are asking these questions. And as I write about in Honest Sex, we tend to talk about the more surface layers because the deeper layers are vulnerable. We don't always know what they are. They tend to be much more full of emotion and the unknown. And so these questions come from this place of, what am I doing wrong? Or what's wrong with me? And first, I just want to say there's nothing wrong with you. And I don't like to look at it through the lens of right and wrong. I like to look at it through the lens of what is effective. How can we feel closer? How can we be more connected to each other? And so this first piece may sound shocking, but if you stay with me, I think it has the power to really change how you think about sex, intimacy, and long-term relationships. Okay, here it is. Women don't stop wanting sex. They often stop wanting the sex they've been having. Take a breath again, because I know this can be shocking. I'm not saying you haven't been a good lover. What I'm saying is there's actually some hope in it, because if a woman's desire simply disappeared with age, hormones, health issues, etc., there wouldn't be much you could do about it. But that's not what I've seen. What I've seen is much more nuanced than that. So when a man comes to me and says, why doesn't my wife want to have sex anymore? Again, we're not just talking about sex. We're talking about loneliness. We're talking about rejection, feeling powerless, helpless, feeling attractive or not, wondering if attraction is fading. It really cuts to the core, especially, like I said, because this has been a way that men are taught they can ask for closeness. And it gives that kind of permission to be vulnerable and to say, hey, I have a need, especially for men who identify as nice guys and they keep their needs under the surface. So the reality is that hormones play a part and health plays a part, and even a fading relationship plays a part. But there's also more going on in midlife for women. There's something new happening. Women who grew up trying to be a good girl or to be likable, all the way to women who grew up trying to be independent and not need anyone, and most women in between, have a really hard time asking for the kind of touch and affection that feels good, or saying when it doesn't. I know even for myself, and having been a coach for more than 20 years, it still isn't easy for me to say, ooh, that feels a little bit painful, or feels kind of meh at this moment. And there can be a millimeter difference in where you're touching, a difference in pressure that is very small. And it can shift something from feeling amazing to feeling meh or even awful. I know this can feel maddening at times for men because I've talked to so many men, and you can't learn how to touch one woman and have it work the same for the next woman. And you can't just rely on what worked a day ago and think that it's going to be exactly the same. And as I start giving you the 6 different ways I've worked with couples to co-create more of this desire and pleasure, you'll understand how you can start shifting from thinking you have to know and wondering and feeling totally confused to actually knowing. When midlife and sometimes perimenopause hits, it's often a time when women are tired of not being understood or attuned to. There's been a lifetime focusing on making sure everyone else is happy, and often without realizing how much they've lowered their expectations for what's possible in their own lives, intimate and otherwise, and they can hit a wall. I see this for myself even in parenting, where I just sort of give up on my desires at times when I'm with my kid, the music I listen to, or the things that we're going to do in a day. And I see how her dad is much less likely to do that. He's much more, oh, this is what I want, so we're going to work this in. Women can lose themselves. We can all lose ourselves. It doesn't have to be a gendered thing. But if we're talking about what causes a woman's sex drive to fade, as women are less willing to settle or to accommodate or to disconnect from themselves, and as they're speaking up about what's real for them, it actually includes saying no. And because it's a new practice, right? We talk about practicing love. It's a new practice. So when it happens, it doesn't necessarily feel graceful or collaborative. It can come out as defensive rather than vulnerable. And everybody can get their feelings hurt. And most couples haven't had the support or the education to talk about this constructively, and walk around wondering and wanting everyone to read their minds, which, please, I would say I don't want to say give that up. What I would say is you have to build up to that. If you haven't spent years speaking up about your specific desires and giving feedback in the moment about how something feels, you're not going to be able to read each other's minds. You will start to learn the practice of attunement, and I wrote about this some in Honest Sex, but you can't expect to just read each other's minds. We're more complicated than that as humans. Even last night in my relationship, we had this grand plan. It's supposed to be time for intimacy, and I ended up crying and talking about something I was struggling with in my body, and my partner, such an incredible man, recognized, oh, we've been feeling disconnected. It's summer. We've had a lot going on. My kid is home. There's so much happening. And we really had to slow it down and decide that we were going to reconnect instead of just trying to force being sexually intimate with each other. So it happens to all of us. And we were talking after, as we were eating dinner, we were talking about how the saving grace is that we talk about this, and how we can't imagine, for couples who don't talk about this, how distant people can become. So the shift that I want you to understand beyond, we have to talk about these things, and if they they create more distance, is that people think desire lives inside one person. But I would call that a skewed model and one that is not satisfying for people. And when you live inside the model of desire being in one person or another, what's common is to try to get the other person to change. When you start to shift the understanding to recognize that desire actually lives inside the relationship between two people, that is not something one partner gives and the other receives, it's actually something two people create, it stops being about trying to get someone to change. And it's then about what can we co-create together. Now, sometimes this takes releasing history, right? I call it, or overcoming some of the past that's gotten in the way. It doesn't always happen immediately. But when you start to think about co-creating, you start to think about listening to each other's minds and hearts and bodies. And you start to wonder what would give us both more pleasure? What would give each of us a sense of feeling loved and cared for? And the pleasure that comes from this, I would say sexually, yes, but also even deeper from knowing that you're loved and wanted and seen and cherished and understood, is like nothing that many people have ever experienced before. And I want that for you. I want you to feel loved and cherished and understood and known intimately, mentally, emotionally, physically. It then does become, in a way, like someone's reading your mind. But there also isn't that pressure that you just have to know. There are 6 different ways that I teach my clients to create the kind of relationship where you're co-creating and where there isn't that kind of resentment and disappointment between each other. So I want to give you those so that you can start practicing and playing with them. The first one is becoming a student of your partner. One of the ways I do this with my partner is that we have dates where we come up with something that we want to try, something we want to experience, and we set aside time and we get to know each other. And another thing that I would call this is a clinic. I was actually just talking to a girlfriend the other day who is going to meet someone for the first time who she's been talking to long distance. And we were talking about, what happens if the kissing doesn't go well and everything else has been so amazing. And I said, oh, you could do a kissing clinic where you check it out and you actually talk about what would feel better, what would feel more connected. And I think a lot of people balk at this idea and they think, well, I just want it to be spontaneous and I just want it to be already there. We already know each other so well. But the reality is there's so much to get to know, and it doesn't have to be the end of a relationship or the downfall when something isn't working well if you talk about it and if you play with and explore and bring some lightness to it. So with the dates that I have with my partner where we set aside time and we ask for what we want, there are ways that it challenges us. Sometimes we've not known what we wanted, and then we have to take some time to think about that. And we help each other. We support each other. So as you hear your partner's requests, you're becoming a student of your partner. You're understanding what they want, what they need, and you're also being a partner to them in that you can help them clarify. You can ask what they would really want if they were willing to take a risk. These experiences we've had have been some of the most intimate and beautiful experiences of our relationship. The second way to co-created desire in a relationship is to not settle for good enough. If sex is fine, it will fade. If nothing new is happening, you're going to get bored. And when I say new, I don't mean new poses, new toys. It's not like it has to be some big thing, but new as in there's a new emotion, there's a new willingness to risk, there's a new part that you're willing to reveal. Even that can be the kind of newness that creates more intimacy and connection between each other. So if sex has felt like, yeah, it's fine, it's good, I would say don't stay there. Start to ask each other, what would make this even better? Not from a problem, not from something's bad or wrong, but from the fact that there's more. We don't have to settle for good or good enough. We can create something great or amazing. The third way to co-create a relationship that is passionate and connected is to slow down, sexually especially. Oftentimes it can feel like, oh no, if we slow down, it's not going to happen. But from the beginning of when I was working with men, I would teach men that slowing down often leads to speeding up. Because as you slow down and as you get more connected and as you're doing things like breathing together or possibly looking into each other's eyes or slowing your touch down so that you're actually more aware of your fingertips on your partner, you're slowing down, but it goes so much deeper. The touch creates more turn on. The breath creates more relaxation. All these conditions start to occur. It's a little bit more like how it takes 70 to 90% of the rocket fuel to get a rocket off the ground. And so once the rocket is going, it can blast off. Slowing down is a little bit like that. And again, some of the most amazing experiences of my life where I've felt the most loved and cared for and also able to open up to another person have been when we decided together that we were going to explore what it's like to slow down. The fourth way to co-create desire and passion is to move beyond one-dimensional sex. And maybe this is something you're already doing, maybe not. In my book, Honest Sex, I wrote about four-dimensional sex, where it's not only physical, the first dimension, but also emotional, energetic, and spiritual. And so as you add more of these dimensions, there's more to feel. There's more to experience. There's more love. There's more play. It goes deeper and it gets more connected. The fifth one to co-create more desire is to create experiments. And I mentioned this one as I talked about getting to know your partner. These dates that my partner and I have came out of an experiment that we did. If you're familiar with Betty Martin, she created something called the 3-minute game. She has a very powerful teaching on consent and goes way deeper into this than I'm going to go today. But the 3-minute game is an experiment, I would call it, where each person gets touched for 3 minutes in different ways, and you get to practice asking for what you want, and you get to practice receiving, and you get to practice negotiating, collaborating. My partner and I did this, and he thought it was a little bit odd. It was when we first started getting to know each other, and we went away together, and I said, "Ooh, can we do this experiment or play this game?" And he was like, "Okay, it's a little odd, but I'm willing." And it totally blew his mind. And out of that came these longer dates that we've been creating for each other that have brought so much more intimacy into our sex life. When you have an experiment, there's not a lot of pressure. You're not trying to get something right or do it well. It's like, let's see what happens when we do this. And that kind of attitude, that kind of more playful, light way of approaching intimacy goes a lot better than pressure and seriousness. And the last one, number 6, to co-create more pleasure, more desire, more intimacy, is to recognize when you're taking things personally and to let that go. I remember when someone decades ago told me I was bad at giving back rubs, and I took it personally and I felt ashamed, and it took me a really long time to give a back rub again. And that got in the way of some of my relationships. And I know that there are moments where someone has said, "Ooh, that doesn't feel good." And I've taken it as I'm bad. I'm wrong. I'm not doing a good job. And the only thing that does is kill desire, kill passion. What I'm not saying is to make yourself wrong about taking something personally. That just adds another layer of judgment. but to bring in compassion for yourself and to even be vulnerable with your partner when that happens, to say, ooh, I just started going down a shame spiral, or I just took that really personally and I need a moment to recover. Or, hey, I took that really personally. Could you remind me that you still love me, even though that didn't feel good? When you start having that level of conversation with each other, then you are co-creating and you're on each other's side. You're on the same team. And if something fades, the fear that, oh shit, this is all going to fall apart is much less likely because you are on the same team. Okay, I hope these practices are helpful for you. And what I would love for you to take away from this episode is that if your partner's desire has faded, you don't have to assume you're failing. You don't have to assume you're wrong. You actually don't have to assume anything. And what I would rather you do is get curious and go deeper. Ask questions. Really check out, what is she longing for now? And what kind of relationship haven't you co-created yet? And ask yourself about what you're longing for. What would be meaningful, exciting for you? Because the more you know your desire instead of your complaint, the more inspiring the vision is. And the more likely that she will want to co-create that with you. I talk about this a lot with my clients and in Honest Sex, that the opposite side of the coin from complaint is desire. Most people walk around, and I was guilty of this, sharing their complaints. It does not create passion or turn on. So if you want to create more of that intimacy, bring your desires. I know that the best sex of your relationship, the closeness of your relationship, doesn't have to be behind you. It doesn't have to be gone forever. It may look different now because it's not about trying to get back to what you had. Our bodies are different. Our psyches are different. Our souls are different. For most people, it gets more connected, more vulnerable, more raw, more real. And it's really about starting to create something you've never experienced before. One of my colleagues, Jed Diamond, who's in his 80s, and another teacher of mine who's in her 80s, we've had conversations about how sex can be so powerful and so beautiful, even if your body doesn't work like it did. That there are new domains, new dimensions that open up even as a result of that. I hope that you have something new to practice with. If you have questions or you want to know more, please email me, Shana at shanajamescoaching.com. And Shana is Shana. I answer all my emails personally. You can also take the quiz in the show notes to see what's getting in the way of you having the best love and sex of your life. And overall, remember that this is a practice. That's why I called the podcast Practicing Love, because we don't know it and get it right. We are continually, and I think forever, practicing love. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Practicing Love. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and gained insight into yourself and your current and past relationships and inspiration for what's possible. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review to help people find us. If you'd like more support in your love life, be sure to get your free copy of my best-selling book, Honest Sex, at shanajamescoaching.com/free. That's shanajamescoaching.com/free. And we'll see you next time.